There's something quietly heartbreaking about constantly showing up for others, while deep down, you feel like no one truly shows up for you. You answer the messages, give the advice, stay available even when you're tired, and yet, instead of feeling appreciated, you feel invisible. It's as if the more you give, the less you're seen, and what's worse is, we're taught to believe this is strength, that saying yes to everyone is love, that being endlessly accessible makes us good, kind, worthy. But in the teachings of the Buddha, there's a very different kind of wisdom, one that says peace isn't found in being everything for everyone. It's found in learning when to step back, when to be still, and when to reclaim your presence by first honoring your absence. The Buddha once said, "Do not look for a sanctuary in anyone except yourself." That isn't selfishness, it's sacred responsibility. In today's video, we're going to talk about what happens when you stop being endlessly available, and how that shift, though uncomfortable at first, becomes the doorway to deep inner peace, clarity, and respect, both from yourself and others. We're diving into how withdrawal, when done mindfully, isn't abandonment, but alignment, and why choosing stillness over reaction, silence over performance, and peace over people-pleasing will transform not just your relationships but your entire life. This is one of those topics that stirs something in the soul, because so many of us are carrying the weight of being needed, but secretly longing to feel whole. If you've been feeling stretched too thin, this is for you. And if what we're doing here resonates with your journey, if you value this path of Buddhist wisdom and emotional clarity, there's one small, free way to support it. Just tap the subscribe button. It helps us grow this space of peace and presence. Also, I encourage you to watch all the way through. Don't skip around. Every part of this video is designed to gently guide you deeper into something powerful. Let's begin this journey inward, together. There's a certain kind of strength that doesn't come from speaking louder, working harder, or doing more. It comes from pulling back, not out of fear but from clarity. The moment you stop trying to explain yourself, prove your worth, or chase people who don't value your presence, something unexpected happens. The energy shifts. Suddenly, the room feels different. People notice your silence more than they notice your words. They lean in. They pause. They start treating your time like something sacred instead of something owed. It's not about playing games. It's about honoring your energy, your peace, and your right to withdraw without guilt. In Buddhist philosophy, withdrawal isn't running away, it's returning to yourself. The Buddha often spoke of retreat, not as isolation, but as realignment. When the world gets loud and your mind feels scattered, stepping back is how you remember what truly matters. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha says, "As a solid rock is not shaken by the wind, so the wise are not moved by praise or blame." That kind of steadiness doesn't come from constantly reacting to life. It comes from learning how to be still, how to listen inwardly, and how to walk away from what disturbs your peace. There's a story of a monk who lived near a village filled with chatter, conflict, and constant need. Everyday people came to him, not always for wisdom, but often just to vent, demand, or distract. One morning, without saying a word, the monk left and disappeared into the forest for weeks. When he returned, someone asked why he left so suddenly. He replied, "Because I needed to hear myself again." That is the power of withdrawal. It's not abandonment. It's a conscious decision to stop pouring into people and places that never pause to pour back. When you are always available, always responding, always on, you start to lose the ability to hear your own inner voice. You become more reactive and less intentional, and over time, you forget what you even need. Withdrawal creates space to reflect, to rest, to realign. It's not a rejection of the world, it's a reconnection with your inner world. And when you honor that space, you stop running on empty. You start showing up not from obligation, but from wholeness. That's when people feel your presence more deeply, because now it's coming from a place of truth. There's a different kind of exhaustion that no one talks about. It's not the kind that comes from physical labor or long hours. It's the kind that creeps in slowly, after too many days of being constantly accessible to everyone but yourself. You might wake up already feeling tired, not because you didn't sleep, but because you know the day ahead will be filled with answering, fixing, showing up, holding space for others while leaving none for yourself. And what's even more confusing is that this cycle often gets mistaken for generosity, for being dependable, for being strong, but in reality, it's draining you from the inside out, quietly, consistently, completely. Buddhist wisdom teaches us that energy is sacred. It's not something we give without awareness. It's something we must protect with intention. The Buddha said, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." And that applies to where your energy flows too. If you constantly allow yourself to be accessed by everyone at any time, you're not just sharing energy, you're leaking it. And what leaks over time disappears. So many of us grew up believing that being available equals being valuable, that saying yes proves our worth, that the more we give, the more we matter. But here's the truth. If your presence is always on tap, people stop noticing its depth. Your light becomes background noise. And the most painful part, you start forgetting your own radiance too, because when you're always responding to others, you're never really responding to yourself. The Buddha didn't encourage constant giving without reflection. He taught middle path, balance, moderation, and mindfulness. He emphasized the importance of retreat, silence, and solitude as forms of inner nourishment. If you never pause to refill your own well, eventually there will be nothing left to offer. Not because you don't care, but because you've been empty for too long. There's this subtle belief so many of us carry without even realizing it, that in order to be loved, we have to be needed, that the more people rely on us, the more secure our place is in their lives. So we show up before we're asked, we offer help before it's wanted, we pour our energy into solving problems that aren't ours to solve. Not because we don't care, but because somewhere deep inside, we're afraid that if we're not constantly useful, we'll be forgotten. But here's the truth that can be hard to hear. Being endlessly needed isn't love. It's often a quiet form of self-abandonment, disguised as devotion. In Buddhist philosophy, one of the roots of suffering is attachment, not just to people or things, but to roles and identities we've clung to for security. We become attached to being the rescuer, the helper, the dependable one. We mistake being needed for being valued. But the Buddha taught that true peace comes from releasing these attachments, not because we don't care, but because we recognize they're keeping us from being whole. There's a kind of freedom that only arrives when you realize your worth isn't tied to how many fires you put out for other people. You are worthy even in your stillness, even in your silence. Think about this. If you weren't constantly showing up for others, who would you be? That question can feel terrifying at first, because so many of us build our identity around being essential to everyone else. But if your value is based on being needed, then it's never safe to rest. You're constantly in motion, constantly proving. And eventually that catches up with you, in your body, in your mind, in your spirit. There's nothing noble about burnout. Sometimes the reason we feel lost isn't because we're doing too little, but because we're doing too much of the wrong things. Life pulls at us from every direction: family, work, notifications, opinions, obligations. And slowly, almost without realizing it, we start living in response to everything around us. We become reactive instead of intentional. We say yes without asking why. We stay busy without asking if we're moving towards something that actually matters. But the Buddha's teachings are very clear on this. A mind that is scattered loses its peace, and so does a life that is stretched in every direction. There's a quiet kind of power in learning to pause and ask yourself, what really matters to me? Not what looks impressive, not what earns praise, not what keeps others happy, but what truly aligns with the values that live in your heart. Because the truth is, if you don't define your own values, the world will define them for you. Society will convince you that constant productivity equals worth, that being available to everyone equals love, that success means never resting. But Buddhism invites us into a different kind of clarity, a sacred clarity that begins with asking, where is my energy going, and is it returning? Think of your life like a garden. You have only so much water, your time, your energy, your focus. If you try to water every single plant, every corner, every weed, nothing grows deep. Everything stays surface level. But if you choose just a few areas that really matter, your peace, your spiritual path, your closest relationships, you give them the attention they need to flourish. The Buddha said, your work is to discover your world, and then with all your heart give yourself to it. That's not a call to overextend, that's a call to focus. Start by identifying 3 core priorities in your life. These should be values that resonate deeply, like compassion, creativity, inner peace, or presence. Then, begin filtering your decisions through those values. Ask yourself, does this invitation, this task, this relationship serve what matters most to me? If not, you're allowed to let it go, not out of indifference but out of respect for your time, your path, your peace. Because when you focus on what truly matters, your energy becomes sharper, your days become clearer, and your life starts to feel like your own again. And in that clarity, the chaos begins to fade. Sometimes the hardest part isn't saying no, it's dealing with the guilt that follows. It's the second guessing, the over-explaining, the tiny voice in your head asking, did I upset them? Should I have said yes instead? It's wild how often we bend ourselves into knots just to justify a boundary we had every right to set. And yet we rarely see others doing the same when they say yes or prioritize their own needs. Somewhere along the line, many of us learned that in order to protect our peace, we have to defend it like it's something fragile or selfish. But Buddhism teaches something else entirely. Your inner peace is sacred. And sacred things don't need to be explained. They just need to be respected. The Buddha spoke about sammasankappa, right intention, as a part of the Eightfold Path. This isn't just about being morally good. It's about making decisions that reflect clarity, compassion, and wisdom. When you set a boundary, when you say, I can't, or not right now, you are acting from intention. You are choosing peace over pressure. And the truth is, peace often comes with silence. You don't owe long speeches about why you're choosing rest or why you're not attending that event, or why you need time to yourself. Your no can be a complete sentence. That's not coldness, it's clarity. And clarity, in Buddhist practice, is a form of kindness. Because when you are clear with yourself, you show up more authentically for others too. Think of it like a temple. The temple doesn't open its gates all day and all night. It closes, it protects its sacred space. No explanations, no guilt. It simply honors its rhythm. You deserve to do the same with your time and your energy. There's a kind of dignity in silence, a powerful, quiet confidence that doesn't need validation. When you stop justifying your boundaries, you send a message not just to others, but to yourself. I trust me, I value my peace, and when people see that you honor your own limits without apology, they learn to respect them too. There's a subtle kind of suffering that comes when you keep bending yourself to fit into other people's expectations. You start to say yes when your heart is quietly screaming no. You hold back your truth just to avoid rocking the boat. You adjust your tone, your choices, even your presence, not because it aligns with your soul, but because it keeps the peace. But peace that costs you your authenticity isn't real peace. It's self-abandonment in disguise. And over time, this quiet betrayal of your inner self begins to feel heavier than any argument you were trying to avoid in the first place. In Buddhist teachings, the journey to liberation always starts from within. The Buddha taught that suffering often arises not from external events, but from the stories we tell ourselves about who we should be, how we should act, and what others want from us. When those stories aren't rooted in our own truth, they pull us away from who we really are. That's why defining your own values isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. It's the foundation for a life that feels meaningful, intentional, and peaceful. Without clear values, we're like a leaf in the wind, blown in every direction by the mood of the moment or the opinions of others. So take a pause and ask yourself, what do I deeply care about? What principles do I want to shape my life around? Maybe it's compassion, maybe it's simplicity, maybe it's honesty, creativity, or stillness. Whatever they are, write them down, feel them in your bones, let them become your compass. Because once you define your values clearly, decision-making gets lighter. Boundaries become easier. You stop being available to everything that doesn't align, and that's not arrogance, that's self-respect. The Buddha reminded us that better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. In that spirit, your values don't need to be explained to everyone, they just need to be lived. When your life is built on your truth, not what looks good, not what pleases others, you begin to feel something rare, peace that doesn't depend on approval. You stop performing and start being. That's when everything begins to feel like your own again. That's when life gets lighter, not because it's easier, but because it's finally aligned with who you really are. There's a quiet ache that grows when your sense of self becomes tied to other people's reactions. You don't notice it at first. You're just trying to be kind, to help, to show up. But slowly, you start to lose yourself in the process. Every time someone smiles, praises you, or thanks you, you feel valuable. And when they don't, you question your worth. The Buddha called this the 8 worldly winds: praise and blame, gain and loss, pleasure and pain. When we attach ourselves to these ever-changing conditions, our inner peace becomes unstable. We feel pulled in every direction, chasing validation like a traveler chasing the horizon, never quite reaching it. So many of us remain constantly available, not because it brings us joy, but because we're afraid of being forgotten. We think if we don't show up, if we don't respond immediately, we'll lose our place in people's lives. But here's what Buddhist wisdom gently reminds us. Your value is not based on your availability. Your peace is not something others grant you through approval. It's something you cultivate through awareness. When the Buddha taught about detachment, he didn't mean coldness or apathy. He meant releasing the need for constant affirmation. To live without being tossed around by the opinions and moods of others is a sign of inner strength. Ask yourself honestly, how often do you say yes out of fear, not desire? How often do you stay connected to people, not because the connection feeds your soul, but because the silence scares you? This is the illusion we get caught in, that being needed equals being loved. But love, true love, doesn't require performance. It doesn't ask you to sacrifice your peace for its presence. There's a kind of freedom that arises when you stop needing others to validate your choices. When you walk your path without constantly checking if others approve, it doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care deeply, but you no longer need applause to feel enough. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha said, "Let none find fault with others. Let none see the omissions and commissions of others, but let one see one's own acts, done and undone." That's the shift. Turn inward. Focus on your own truth. Detach from the noise, because the moment you stop being available for validation is the moment you start becoming available for your own peace. There comes a moment, often quietly and without warning, when your heart whispers, "You can't carry this anymore." Not because you don't care, but because caring has turned into over-carrying. You've become the emotional first responder for people who've never learned how to stand on their own. You feel it in your body, the fatigue, the tightness in your chest, the way your mind never quite rests. And still, you keep showing up, don't you? Out of love, out of guilt, out of fear that if you don't hold everything together, it'll all fall apart. But the truth is, when you spend your life rescuing everyone, you forget what it means to rescue yourself. In Buddhism, compassion is one of the highest virtues. But compassion without wisdom becomes attachment. The Buddha never taught us to fix people. He taught us to walk beside them without losing our path. There's a powerful teaching in letting go, not from apathy, but from awareness. When you're constantly stepping in, constantly trying to shield others from their own consequences, you're not helping them grow. You're protecting them from discomfort, yes, but you're also robbing them of their chance to evolve. Growth often happens in the fire, in the unraveling, in the struggle. And when you keep pulling people out of their discomfort, you also keep them from transformation. It takes courage to step back and let someone face their own chaos. It feels unnatural at first, especially when your identity has become so tied to being the one who's always there. But there's a difference between support and self-sacrifice. One builds bridges, the other builds cages. And often, we trap ourselves in the role of the rescuer, not realizing that it's fueled by our own fear. Fear of being unloved, unneeded, or forgotten if we stop giving. There's an old Buddhist parable about a man crossing a river with the help of a raft. When he reaches the other side, he continues to carry the raft on his back. The Buddha asks, why carry something once it's served its purpose? The same goes for emotional burdens. Some people, some situations were only meant to help us grow, not follow us forever. Letting go doesn't mean abandoning others. It means finally choosing yourself, not from selfishness, but from sacred self-respect. Because the moment you stop rescuing everyone else is often the first moment you begin truly healing yourself. There's something quietly corrosive about the way our minds have been trained to chase noise. We wake up and the first thing we check isn't our breath or our state of mind, it's our notifications. We scroll before we speak. We respond before we reflect. And little by little, our presence is pulled out of us until we're no longer rooted in our own lives. What used to be sacred silence has now become an uncomfortable gap we're desperate to fill. But the Buddha taught something radically different. He taught that true understanding and wisdom arise not in noise, but in stillness. That silence isn't empty. It's full of the answers we can't hear when our attention is scattered. Digital overstimulation is the modern form of suffering that the Buddha's teachings predicted long before smartphones were invented. It's the mind grasping, reaching, endlessly seeking stimulation to avoid stillness. But here's the truth. Distraction is not harmless, it steals from you. Every alert, every buzz, every endless scroll costs you something. A drop of peace, a fragment of presence, a breath of clarity. And most of the time we don't even realize it. We call it connection, but often it's disconnection from ourselves. Buddhism teaches mindfulness not just in meditation, but in how we move through our days. What if, instead of grabbing your phone in the morning, you returned to your breath? What if your first act of the day wasn't to check on others, but to check in with yourself? This isn't about abandoning technology. It's about mastering your relationship with it. Your device should be a tool, not a tyrant. The Buddha taught that, drop by drop, the water pot is filled. But drop by drop, our peace is also drained if we don't pay attention to where our mind is flowing. There's a strange kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from physical activity. It comes from mental overstimulation. You wake up already checking your phone, scroll through 100 posts before breakfast, reply to messages before your mind has even taken its first breath of calm, and before you know it, your day has already been claimed by everything and everyone except you. The noise never stops, and because we're so used to it, we start thinking it's normal. But Buddhism invites us to ask a deeper question. What if it's not the noise around us that's the problem, but the fact that we've forgotten how to be still? In the Dhammapada, the Buddha said, "Few are those who cross to the further shore. Most people remain running up and down this side." That running, that constant movement, both physical and mental, that's what we're trained to do. To be available, to be reactive, to be productive. But rarely are we taught how to pause, how to sit with ourselves, how to allow our minds to become like still water, reflecting the truth rather than being disturbed by every ripple of the world. Stillness in Buddhist practice is not laziness, it's not passive. It's a very alive, conscious choice. It's a commitment to inner clarity over external chaos. When you allow yourself to be still, you begin to notice things you normally overlook. The tension you carry, the thoughts you've been avoiding, the stories your mind is telling that aren't even true. And in that space, you find something precious. Your true self, unshaken, aware, and deeply peaceful. Choosing inner stillness over constant outer access doesn't mean withdrawing from life. It means engaging with life from a place of clarity rather than compulsion. It's the monk who meditates before he speaks. It's the person who responds with thoughtfulness rather than reaction. It's the decision to be rooted before being available. And from that rootedness, everything changes. Your energy deepens, your presence becomes more powerful, and your peace, no longer dependent on the world being quiet, starts to become your natural state. There's a strange kind of pressure many of us carry, almost without realizing it, the need to explain ourselves, to be understood, to justify our decisions, our silence, our distance, our healing. It starts small. You say no to a plan and immediately feel the need to explain why. You take a step back from someone and feel the guilt of not being able to make them understand. But here's the truth that Buddhist teachings quietly whisper: peace doesn't require permission. And it doesn't come from making others comfortable with your truth. It comes from being deeply at peace with it yourself. The Buddha taught that true liberation begins with letting go of attachments, yes, but also letting go of the craving to be seen in a certain light. In Dhammapada he says, "Let go of anger, let go of pride, and when you are bound by nothing, you go beyond sorrow." This includes letting go of the constant striving to be understood, because when your peace depends on being understood by everyone, you give away the very stillness you've been working so hard to build. Think about how much energy you've spent trying to explain your path to people who were never meant to walk it with you. How many times you've diluted your truth so it wouldn't ruffle feathers. How often you've bent yourself into versions that made others more comfortable, while you felt more and more out of alignment with your own soul. Buddhism invites us to step off that exhausting treadmill, to stop editing ourselves for applause, to stop shrinking for the sake of harmony, especially when that harmony costs us our peace. When we release the need to be understood, we begin to taste something much richer than approval. We taste freedom. The freedom to be quiet without guilt, the freedom to say no without an essay, the freedom to walk a slower path, a softer one, a more sacred one, even if no one claps for it. The Buddha didn't chase crowds or beg to be validated. He sat beneath a tree in stillness, rooted in his truth, radiating peace simply by being. That's the kind of energy you start to carry when you stop explaining and start embodying. You don't have to be everywhere to be enough. You don't have to explain yourself, prove yourself, or make yourself constantly available to earn peace. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to pause, to step back, and to choose yourself. In that stillness, you'll hear something the noise was drowning out, your own wisdom, and that wisdom will guide you home. If this message touched your heart, there's another video waiting on the screen that will take you even deeper into this journey. Let it walk with you. And thank you truly for being a part of Buddhist journey.